So good afternoon, everybody. Mary Hunt here at Water. We have the pleasure of Kwok Pui-lan with us today to talk about post-colonial politics and theology, unraveling empire for a global world. This is one of those books that you want to have in your library. You want to be able to have a copy, mark it up, really interact with it, because it takes us many places. And I think that will happen this afternoon here on this Zoom call as well. So 1,000 welcomes to everybody. This is, as you know, the day after the midterms here in the US, and things aren't as bad as we thought. I think we thought we'd be tearing our hair from the deepest roots, but in fact, we're in problems at one level, but we are also better off than we thought we would have been at this time yesterday. So I think that's a fair assessment of where we are. I'm Mary Hunt. I'm the co-director of WATER, the Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Ritual, that brings you this session. My co-director, Diane New, is with us as well. We are in the WATER office, and we are with some very dear colleagues. And I won't mention the fact that we just had a very delicious lunch, which was provided by one of our great colleagues, Claire Francie Cromer, who's sitting with Pamela Miller. Pamela is a Master's of Divinity student at Wesley Seminary, and Claire Francie is a graduate. Reverend Claire Francie Cromer is a graduate of Wesley Seminary, has a master's degree, and is going to be pursuing a doctorate in ministry. And she is the ministry partner for Pamela Miller, who is Jamaican born and an MDiv student at Wesley. So we have just had a sumptuous lunch provided by Claire Francie and her dear husband. So I'm sorry to mention it because it was so lovely, but we enjoyed it for all of you. We also have with us, and I'm happy to introduce her, our newest colleague, Patrice Rupp from Germany. She might wave. Patrice, you could wave. She is from Baden-Württemberg. She's studying in Heidelberg, and she is with us for a year through a German volunteer program and through the Church of the Brethren. So we're excited to have her with us. She's a welcome addition to our team. And yesterday she had the opportunity to go to the polls. This is not Chicago, so she did not vote either early or often, but she got to look at the American process as it played out in our neighborhood here in Silver Springs. So a great welcome to you, Patrice. And of course, a hearty welcome to Pamela and Claire Francie, who are now somewhat long, Claire Francie especially a longtime water person, and Pamela well into her practicum in ministry and mission. So that's what's happening here, with one additional wonderful thing that's going on. And some of you may have gotten the email about it. We have and are delighted to be producing for the world an essay contest that will help us to bring to public attention short essays that will be, whether in social media or in other publications, and it is the Rosemary Ganley essay contest through WATER. And Rosemary Ganley, as many of you know from our programs, writes 650-word essays every week for her local newspaper in Peterborough, Ontario, publishes them as an anthology at the end of the year, and kicks up a lot of dust in 650 words, and really does a wonderful job of making political issues, feminist issues, feminist theological issues alive and well for a large public. So we have, through the generosity of an anonymous donor, we have the very good fortune of offering this essay contest. You can write 650 words, style Rosemary Ganley, and there will be 3 prizes of $650 per essay. So if you have the opportunity or have students who would like to participate in this, we will be offering more details, of course, are on our website, but you can certainly get the information. I think you probably got it yesterday in the mailing. But we're just delighted with this, and to honor Rosemary Ganley in this way, I can think of no better way than to imitate her in this style of writing. So that's it from WATER. Again,
Mary, one more thing from WATER.
Sure.
I would like to just point out that Monica Maher from Brazil, Ecuador, was WATER's first intern. And I'd like to keep pointing out who the interns are with one another. So Monica holds that distinction. Yay, Monica. You were so young then. And look at you now, so well accomplished. Thank you. And thanks for being with us always.
WATER interns are the best part of WATER, and there have been over 90 of them. They go on to do great and good things, and we love them and support them and promote them at every opportunity, because they really are what water is. With that, let me return to a special welcome to our speaker, Professor Kwok Pui-lan, longtime friend of mine and of water. Delighted to have you grace our circle once again and to wish you a very happy return to water. Kwok is making very clear that we want to have time for people to talk about the midterms and feelings about that in the context of the work that she's doing. So we'll take that into consideration as we move along with our agenda. Let me begin, as we always do here at Water, with a land acknowledgement. We at Water are the indigenous land in Silver Spring, Maryland, that is traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge the trauma and injustice toward indigenous people that is deep in US culture and history. We join in efforts to eradicate it in all forms of racism, to make reparations for the genocide involved. Water's work is aimed at bringing about social justice. Please consider for one moment the Native people on whose land you are privileged to sit today. Water's work brings feminist and womanist spiritual values and intellectual work to efforts at social change. Last month, we were thrilled to have with us, and many of you were with us then, Rabbi Toba Spitzer, who talked about her book, God is Here, Reimagining the Divine. It was a marvelous presentation. We learned a lot last month about language and spirituality from this very learned Jewish colleague. Today, in the wake of the midterm elections and with some contests still in doubt, it's comforting and challenging to have Professor Kwok Pui-lan with us to discuss empire in a global world. Our format today, for those who are not used to water programs, will be the introduction of the speaker, who will have 20 minutes or so, with plenty of time for dialogue after her 20-minute presentation, for questions, for discussion. We invite you to listen and to enjoy. We'll take notes, and the notes will be along with a video of this on our website shortly. We're delighted that you're with us, and we hope that you will mute your audio to cut down on noise and assure a clear line for the presentation. When our professor finishes, you can join the conversation with instructions, which I will give then. But for the moment, if you would mute your phones, that would really help us to get a good, clear line. We will end at 2 p.m. Eastern time to respect everyone's schedule. And you can re-listen or point other people in the direction of this teleconference by going to Water's website, www.waterwomensalliance.org. Look under programs and teleconferences, and you will find it. It'll be up within the week or so. We put the video up as well as the notes. And then we'll keep the Zoom line open for those who wish to continue conversation for a bit after 2 o'clock. We never expect our speaker to stay, although of course she's more than welcome. But when the official session ends, we simply go into more informal conversation, and we look forward to your being part of that. So it's just a way of ending things so people can leave gracefully, as we have covenanted for 1 hour. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kwok Pui-lan, a highly esteemed colleague in my field of religion. She studied in Hong Kong and then in Boston, where she taught for many years at Episcopal Divinity School. She's on the faculty at Chandler School of Theology at Emory University. She previously served there as a distinguished visiting professor of theology. Not unexpectedly, I can report, she was named Faculty Person of the Year by the student body both years that she was visiting. She was named the distinguished, I should say, named the Faculty Person of the Year by students. And you know, students can be hard to please. And when you please them 2 years in a row, because of your outstanding teaching, scholarship, and mentoring, not to mention your robust sense of humor and your remarkable skill as a stand-up comedian, it's quite obvious that this is a special scholar. Kwok's research focuses on Asian feminist theology and post-colonial theology. She's written or edited 23 books in English and Chinese, including Post-Colonial Politics and Theology, The Hong Kong Protests and Political Theology, Occupy Religion, Theology of the Multitude, Post-Colonial Imagination and Feminist Theology, just to name a couple of her titles. Her work has been translated into German and Dutch and Spanish and Portuguese. She's the past president of the American Academy of Religion, past editor of the Journal of Feminist Studies in Religion. And I can say very happily that we've worked together many times over the long years. I always learn a lot from her, and I always enjoy our collaboration. I follow her on Facebook with her lovely grandchildren. And this season, I'm learning from her how to teach spirituality classes online, including embodied physical exercises. How's that for pedagogy? When I blurbed her book, I began with a quote from Pui-lan. I quote her, "Christians have often put their hope in the eschaton, the end time. But post-colonial hope is more like a process, for we cannot defer hope till eternity." Page 203 of this book. So Kwok Pui-lan sets the goal of her work to use religious analysis to bring about global social change. Her essays are clear and crisp. Her approach is accessible and pragmatic. Read this book, I said, to join the efforts to unravel empire. And I reiterate what I said in that blurb from Water, and I welcome you, dear Pui-lan. We're so grateful for your work.
Thank you very much, Mary, for this wonderful introduction. I am very glad to meet all of you virtually. Some of you I have the pleasure of meeting before. Others, I look forward to this conversation. Today, I'm going to talk about my book, Postcolonial Politics and Theology. And then I will also talk about how I reflected on the midterm elections. And I promised Mary that I will leave plenty of time for all of us to converse, to get to know one another, and also to share your reflections on the midterm as well. If you ask me, how long did it take you to write this book? My answer will be a lifetime. Isn't this a wonderful answer? Because thinking and scholarship is always based on a person's life experience. It took me a lifetime to ask the questions that I was able to ask in this book. I know that some of you may not be very familiar with my own growing up in the former colony of the British colony of Hong Kong. So I would like to begin by just sharing with you how I became the theologian that I am today. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about my book and leading to my reflection on the midterm. If we have time, we should have embodied learning, isn't it? So I'm going to teach you simple exercise of Tai Chi before we move to the conversation. And now I'm going to share with you my PowerPoint so you can see some of the pictures. This is my Chinese name, Kwok Pui-lan. If you asked which one is the surname, Kwok is actually the surname. That is how people in East Asia put their name. The surname first, because we honored the family or the larger community first, and then the given names. So please refer to me by my given names, Pui-lan. And now, I think I need to start this again because I cannot advance the slide. Hopefully this works. Yes. So I want to show you Hong Kong in the 70s. Why? I started to learn theology in college in 1971. That was a very tumultuous time, not only in Hong Kong, but also in many parts of the world. Those of you in the US remembered the student protest occupying the administrative buildings at Columbia University and also in the universities in San Francisco. In Hong Kong, we also had the student protest. So then, on this slide, you will see two demonstrations. On the top one was a demonstration against corruption of the government. And then below, you had the demonstration to argue that a small island that is on the North East Asian Sea belongs to China and not to Japan. So when I remembered Hong Kong in the 70s, my college years, I remembered protest. I remembered people against the corruption of colonial government. I remember the struggle to have Chinese as one of the official languages in Hong Kong, because at that time, only English was the official language. That was the background of my journey to begin to study theology. Some of you remember the Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976. Here, you will see the women dress up just the same as men. You recall that the Cultural Revolution was against bourgeois culture, against traditional Chinese patriarchal culture, or Chinese feudalistic culture. So I had the privilege of studying Rosemary Ruther, Mary Daly, and other American feminist theologians' work when I was in college in that far place, Hong Kong. What they were talking about women's liberation was very different from I saw on the news and then the images coming out from here. Women, at least, were considered holding up half of the sky. They dressed like men. It is quite different from the kind of issues that I encountered in Western feminist theological work. During this turbulent 70s, one book that really captured my imagination, it was Gustavo Gutierrez, A Theology of Liberation. By reading this book, I then began thinking about the vocation of a theologian. What is God calling us to do? What is this enterprise that is theology? How can I, as someone colonized by the British, contribute to the discussion of God, to the elaboration of theology? What has God to say to the people in Hong Kong and to say the people in China? Later, I had the opportunity of networking with the Asian feminist theology students. Here, standing in the middle, is Sister Mary John Menanzon from the Philippines. Some of you know her and her work. She is a fabulous Asian feminist theologian, and just recently, she received several awards. She turned 85 this year. Also in the late 70s and early 80s, the networked Asian Women's Resource Center for Culture and Theology began this women's journal, In God's Image. And this is also around that time, the first English book on Asian women's theology published by the late Miriam Catterpole, a Catholic journalist and theologian, was available. This is called Compassionate and Free. So I began participating in the conversation of the development of Asian feminist theology during the time. Now, fast forward, Hong Kong, 1997. As you can see, the New York Times front page talks about China resumes control of Hong Kong, concluding 156 years of British rule. I was already teaching in the United States by then, but my colleagues in Hong Kong have been talking about preparing the church and society for the post-colonial period. Post-colonial, this term, has different meanings. It can mean chronological. Post means after. That means there is pre-1997 and post-1997. Hong Kong became post-colonial, returned back to China, because Hong Kong was ceded to the British after China lost the Opium War. While my colleagues were thinking about the post-colonial situation in Hong Kong, in the United States, I also began reading about post-colonialism and also thinking about how to develop post-colonial theology, because this was a watershed event for myself and for the people of Hong Kong. Of course, today, it is debatable whether Hong Kong is really post-colonial. So one of the questions I always want to ask is, what is the relationship between political theology and post-colonial politics? Because as I was reading about political theology published both in England and in the United States, I became aware that they were not concerned about post-colonial politics. They were writing for people who enjoy what we have seen yesterday. That is, people who have the privilege and rights to vote, or who live in a liberal democracy, or people are welcome to participate in the political process. A lot of the people in the world, having gone through a lengthy colonial legacy, did not and do not enjoy those privileges. And that is why I argue in my book, political theology that is Eurocentric, that is based primarily on the experience of the North Atlantic, will not be adequate or relevant to the majority of the world's people who are still struggling for human rights, for democracy, and for basic human dignity. I write this book with this question in mind. Several events happened during the time when I was conceiving the book. The first was the Hong Kong protest that started in 2019. I selected this image on the right because that was the protest of students in my alma mater, Chinese University of Hong Kong. About 2 million people participated in the protest. It lasted for several years, but of course, after the government imposed the national security law, the demonstration could not continue. And it was also because of COVID that hit China and Hong Kong, as well as other Asian countries, so hard that some of the protests in Hong Kong and also in other Asian cities could not continue as well. At that time, there was also mass movement in the United States. That is the Black Lives Matter movement. So I was comparing or contrasting mass movements that I saw on the street in the United States, demonstrating against the oppression of Black people, but not only in the United States, but across the globe as well. And contrasting this with what I was seeing, protests happening in Hong Kong, as well as in India, in Thailand, and in other Asian cities. And many of us remember that the former president, President Donald Trump, called the COVID virus Chinese virus. And after that, we had serious increase of anti-Asian violence in many parts of the United States. I have never experienced that kind of feeling about risk or danger myself. But during that time, that is in 2020, I became aware that is a body that is colored, whether you are man or woman, may not be safe. that I felt in my body, in my gut. Why Black Lives Matter or Asian Lives Matter. So that was some of those background leading me to think about three things in this book. The first is how to articulate political theology in the changing Asian Pacific. In my short article that I asked you to read before joining today's WATERtalk, I talked about the pivot of the United States from the Middle East to the Asian Pacific. And that is why in my book, I try to charter the development of political theology in Asia, especially in East Asia, and talk about today when we had on one side, make America great again. On the other side, in the Chinese side, you have the peaceful rise of China or rejuvenating the Chinese dream. So how can we talk about political theology when today we have the competition between China and the United States? And many countries, smaller countries in Asia, they have to decide which empire to ally with or to seek protection from. What are some of those important themes or concepts we need to be thinking about if we do theology, not for those who enjoy liberal democracy, but for the world's majority, many located in Asian Pacific, when they are still struggling from basic participation in their government. My second question has today to do with what is the ramification of post-colonial politics. Are we just talking about who controls the government? Are we just talking about democratic structure? Or are we talking about something more? In this book, I argue post-colonial politics is much more than statecraft, government, jurisdiction, sovereignty. Because if we do not consider race, class, gender, and sexuality, we will miss a lot of important debates that are simultaneously going on. Last night, we kept listening to the commentator said, economy is the number one thing. Abortion, not so important. Lo and behold, we woke up this morning to see that may not be the case. Many people did not just pay attention to political economy. They also pay attention to women's reproductive rights and choice. So talking about the intersection of political economy and gender would be important. And in many post-colonial situations, if we just talk about the government or the election, we miss the participation of women and racial minorities because they may not be able to participate in that public arena, but they participate in many other issues that concerns their children, their family, women's rights for education. And so I want to expand the ramification or the perimeter of politics to include the consideration of race, class, gender, and sexuality. The first section of the book talks about practice. Why? It is because we can talk about post-colonial theology or political theology in academia. But without the incarnation of political theology in faith communities or in the wider public, we are doing academic exercise. That is why in the last session of the book, I talked about post-colonial practices, by talking about preaching, by talking about teaching, by talking about interreligious solidarity and planetary ethics and our involvement in challenging those people who deny climate crisis or climate justice. So this book represents my attempt to respond to the signs of our time. That is what I learned from Gustavo Gutierrez. The vocation of a theologian is to speak to the signs of times. So I encourage all of us to think about how or what you have discerned as the signs of our time. Because I know that not everyone is from the United States joining this WATERtalk. We welcome your insights, your reflection on thinking about the signs of our times. So now I want just to talk about a little bit about my reflection on the midterm election. In my home, I do not just listen to the American television or the streaming of those cable news. I also then pay attention to what people in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, in China talk about the news. So I was following, okay, not only the American pundits, but what the people in other parts of the world are talking about the midterms. I want to talk about one theme that I think we really need to pay attention to. What does these midterm elections mean for Sino-American competition? Would the election of more Republicans or Democrats help to lessen the conflicts, the competition? I ask that because this election is not just relevant for American people. It is very important for the future development of Asian Pacific. I always want to ask my American friends when to think about politics in a much more global sense. And I'm glad joining this WATERtalk, we have our friends from Europe, from Latin America, that they may also want to share their reflection, what this midterm means for them. This is number one. Number two, we are very glad to hear that people are very concerned about democracy. Some of those candidates said, oh, democracy is on the ballot. We think that people cannot raise their consciousness to that high level to vote for democracy. Lo and behold, here, when I look at what happened last night, many are really concerned about democracy. I watch this democratic process and compare to the process in China. Some of you have followed the Communist Party in China. They just had their big Congress. You did not have this messy thing because a little group of 7 decided everything. On the one hand, I began to think, which system is the system that will be effective, that will be democratic, that will be participatory? Why do we support the democratic system? I'm not saying the US system is perfect. No, but I am saying, wow, it is so messy. But why do many people support this and thinking that this is better than an oligarchy or a dictatorship? And how can we make the American democratic project better? I am also aware in the 19th century, we tell the rest of the world, that is, if you do not believe in Christianity, you are doomed to hell. And that is why the missionary project is sending them Christianity. Today, isn't it true? The Americans, at least some of them, are saying, oh, we need to convince everyone democracy is so important. We need to have regime changes to make sure the rest of the world will follow our democratic system. Well, we just had a very messy election. Do we think this is something we want other countries to emulate? We spend billions every 2 years now to do this. Who can afford this system? Who are the big corporations? Those 1% of the society that dominate political discourse. Last but not the least, I want to say something about women. I think when we look into who are the people who are voting and why we have something like this and not just a red wave, I suspect there might be women, especially younger women, who really care about reproductive choice, who went out to vote. Otherwise, with that kind of inflation, that kind of economy, we will not have a midterm elections like this. And that is why I close my book with hope. Hope is a process. Hope is not just something we imagined in our head. As a process, each of us, wherever we are, needs to play our part to make sure that the next generation will receive a better world from us. So I just want to stop here. And I especially want to invite our international participants to share their reflections as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kwok Pui-lan. The book is Post-Colonial Politics and Theology, Unraveling Empire for a Global World. I must say, Pui-lan, I didn't overstate my introduction by a syllable. You have shown us once again, not only the brilliance of your analysis and your strategizing, but also of your pedagogy. So thank you very much. Really, thank you so much for this, and especially on this important day. And thank you for your special invitation to those who are among our international participants. One of whom just sent in the chat that she had to leave. She's from Italy. She had to leave, but she sent her thanks and best wishes. I want to open the floor now for conversation. Before I do that, Diane made mention of Monica Maher from Ecuador/Brazil, who was our first intern. I want to make mention of another water intern, lest anyone would mistake the fact that we have never had male interns. Richard Russell is with us. Richard was at Episcopal Divinity School. Pui-lan, you might have known him there,
yes.
Maybe before, yes. And he has the distinction of being the first male intern at Water. And Richard has been a longtime Water supporter and was the person who gave me the idea of moving things onto Zoom and so forth. Richard pushed hard on that, on the meditation question. Why just have it, open it to everybody? So Richard, thank you and welcome to you. And you can see your intern siblings, as it were, around the screen. I also want to open this in a special way to those in the Southern Hemisphere. I know Judy Ress is with us from Brazil. I know, I'm from Chile, from Chile, and I know that there are others. So if there's someone from Malaysia, if you would like to even put your country in the chat, that would also give people a real idea, or as I do in my, I put it simply in my name on the screen, the country I'm from. So that gives us a bit of an idea. Let me turn then to our conversation, and I think Kwok Pui-lan has set the tone by saying, let's let our international folks speak first, especially on the question of the midterms. And if you would, please use the reaction button down on the toward the right-hand side of the bottom of your screen on a lot of these Apple computers at least, and use the hand gesture to raise your hand. If you have trouble with that, just wave your front paw as people have done for generations. So we want to get as many people into the conversation as we can. Please be brief with your comment, but feel free and welcome to make it. The floor is open. Mary Yelenick will be first. I know Mary has to leave shortly, so that's one reason even though she's a resident in New York, she works at the UN. So we'll give her a special pass on this one since she has to leave shortly. Mary.
Yeah, thanks, Mary, and thank you, Pui-lan. That was really, I wish we could talk for hours. Your last slide brings to mind a couple of things about this democracy that we don't acknowledge, I think. The idea of the electoral college, all the states are shown as equal, essentially. Whereas in fact, under majority rule, that is simply not the case. And so when we show each other these maps and we show what is turning red and what is turning blue, it doesn't reflect at all the number of people who are voting. And I think that's a real shortcoming of what we present as our democracy. And the second issue about the map that we use of ourselves is Alaska is shown as being a tiny little sort of afterthought, whereas in fact, that is a huge empire grab. Alaska is probably 10 times that size. And in terms of empire, that reflects United States practice. And so the maps we use to show each other, I think, are deceptive in many ways. But those are the maps we use. And that's how we sort of cling to these myths about ourselves. But this is a wonderful conversation, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. I just took this today from a New York Times just to show where we are. I am certainly aware cartography is very important when we talk about imagination. That is number one. Number two, our democracy is so messy. You talk about the electoral college because an 18th century institution continues to today. And when I look at the electoral college, at first I didn't understand why we have the electoral college, right, from someone from outside. And then when I became aware, then I certainly look at it from a post-colonial perspective. That is, the formation, national formation of the United States is based on violence, genocide of the Native Americans. And I am glad that Mary, you first of all asked us to pause to remember the indigenous people of this land. And national formation has its legacy. We have to remember things that happened in the past is never past until we meet those past with challenge. We have not done so. And that is why the map, the cartography, how we help ourselves to understand the United States, as Mary said, has been biased because a lot has not been said.
Thank you both. Cartography is destiny, huh? Let's hear from others who would like to comment. Please, the floor is open. Especially those of our colleagues who are from outside the US, we'd love to hear your reflections. I see Malaysia, I see Brazil. Who'd like to be next? Sherry White, I see you thinking about something. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, I've been thinking about an awful lot of things, and thank you so much, Pui-lan. When I was in Letty Russell's DMin program, Feminist Theologies program, your writings and those of our African continent colleagues were very meaningful to me because my whole life, practically 3/4 of my life, has been spent in Latin America. And so maybe when you look at me and my name, you're not going to think Latin America, but that has been an important influence in my life, having been born in Chile and then returned as an adult to work among the Mapuches. My childhood was in Cuba. That's where I first met Ofelia Ortega. And then 42 years in Mexico. All of those are my cartography that have influenced my thought and my life. And so the issues that you have brought up about democracy and how the US puts that forth as the great example for the world, looking from further south, it's hard to see that democracy messy, yes, but not fulfilled yet, because I'm sitting in Nashville, Tennessee now, which is a red state, and I am not a Republican. And so thanks to the Electoral College, et cetera, I don't feel I'm represented up here. So how to make democracy viable and work is something that we need to work on in all places. And of course, think if the US is promoting it as the panacea for the world's woes, and we see that it's not working for all of the Americans, United Statesers, I like, and in Mexico, people from the United States are estadounidenses, because America is everybody who lives from Canada all the way to Tierra del Fuego. So democracy is an important one. You mentioned women. I woke up this morning to reading my Mexico City daily, also like you do with your Chinese daily, to see that the situation of women is as bad as ever in terms of femicides in Mexico. There was a mention of several cases that have not been resolved as to bringing justice for the death of several women. And the last 2 or 3, just in the last couple of days, the women were quartered, which means that the way they died was chopping them up into pieces. And so there may be a, quote, better democracy in Mexico now with the current government, but yet the justice from the standpoint of the cartels and the violence towards women is as bad as it ever has been. Correct. So we have an awful lot of work to do, and these are things that we all need to be relying on each other. Like your thoughts are so helpful to see that one is not the only one, that this is a struggle that we all are trying to work on to make this a world of justice and human rights and love for everyone.
Thank you very much for sharing this. And I am also aware of the gender-based violence in Africa, in Asia, and in other parts of the world. And one of the things that I mentioned in the book is we need to reimagine or to reclaim the kind of political theology that has been developed in so many different parts of the world, especially from the protest movements, from the grassroots of women and men. Because when I was doing the research, those voices were not valued. Only the big names are considered political theologians. The Carl Smiths, the Dorothy Soler, the Johann Mass, and others, and of course, Jürgen Moltmann. I am not saying their contribution is not important, but I am arguing there are indigenous wisdoms, there are wisdoms from the women, and can we lift up their voices when we are doing politics and theology? Never forget, we stand on the shoulder of past generation of women who have fought for us. Today, it is our turn. Thank you very much for mentioning the situation in Mexico.
Thank you. Yenny, would you like to make your comment that's in the chat in the plenary? Where's Yenny? Would you like to make your comment that's in the chat? Yenny Delgado Hello, would you like to make your comment in the, yeah, go ahead, please, unmute. If you'd like to unmute, Yanni, you could make your comment here. Maybe not. Okay, well, people can look in the chat and read your astute comment about appreciating Sherry's mentioning America as the whole continent and then talking about the use of other terms to describe it. If you'd like to do that, you're welcome to now. Otherwise, we'll just take it from the chat, make sure it gets into the notes. Who will be next? Floor is wide open now, wide open. Anybody, any continent, any country? Monica Maher and then Richard Russell.
Thank you so much. This was a great talk. Thank you, Pui-lan. It was excellent. And I just wanted to mention that in South America, the eyes have been on Brazil because they just had presidential elections that were really important. And Bolsonaro was voted out, so Lula will be coming back. And a lot of people compare Bolsonaro to Trump. But we have with us too someone from Brazil, and I wanted to ask her to speak because she was in Brazil for the election. Sí, Ana Esther, ¿puede hablar?
Sure, thank you. So thank you, Dr. Kwok Pui-lan, for your presentation. I've heard you speaking several times. I just love it. And yeah, I'm based in the United States now, and I live in Missouri with my wife. But I had the opportunity to travel to Brazil for a week for voting and for celebrating Rio de Janeiro, our victory. But it's not really a victory because we have Lula, but our House of Representatives and our Senate, it's ultra conservative. There is this guy who's called Nicolas Ferreira, and this is a name that we're gonna hear a lot about. He's in his early 20s. And he was the most voted person for the House of Representatives. And he's from my city, Belo Horizonte, and he's ultra conservative. He's the worst face of what we've been calling Bolsonarism. So it's funny because every time I would watch the US elections from Brazil, we would spend more time trying to understand what is this democracy about, because it doesn't make any sense for us, this state swing and things like this. And now, yesterday, my wife was really trying to explain to me this redistricting that doesn't make any sense, how this really connects to democracy and how can we still think that democracy is the best what we can have. So it's a really challenge those times to think in a post-colonial politics, but if from Brazil, I would say a decolonial politics, a different way of creating politics and living, experiencing it. So interesting it's gonna be to see those next 2 years and for 2 years here and next 4 years in Brazil. So thank you, Monica.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Monica. Pui-lan, did you want to make any comment? Are you?
Yes, I was also watching what is happening in Brazil. So last night, there was a commentator who said, how come the Brazilians can figure it out how to do the election? After 3 hours, at least, that person said, you got the result, right? And then the United States is so messy. Lo and behold, we might be waiting until December to know what is happening in the Senate. That is very interesting. That is, this is really United States of America. That is different states. It's not one federal way of election. That is something interesting. That is for people coming from outside to understand. That is number one. Number two, the former president decided to have a transition of power in Brazil, isn't it? Even though he might not want to say, I lost. But look at what happened. After 2 years, we still have those election deniers who were on the ballot yesterday, more than 200 of them. So I don't know whether we are moving forward or bad word. But one thing I know, this is not only in the United States. In Europe, in other parts of the world, we have these conservative forces gripping power. And that is why, as people who are following God's preferential option for the poor and the marginalized, that we cannot rest, that we need to continue the struggle.
Thank you very much, all of you, for that insertion in our conversation, and also the important point of what it means to have political parties involved in the redistricting of various congressional districts, and that really did play a part yesterday. And it's a tough thing to try to explain, but it has played a very difficult role and a complicating role in this whole question. Richard, you were next.
Thanks, Mary. Pui-lan, thank you for your comments. I do live in the US, as you know, but I've spent the past 6 weeks in several Eastern European countries, especially Poland, which has been an interesting place from which to watch yesterday's US elections and to think about democracy. I find myself very interested in hearing a few words from you about how your perspective has evolved in, let's say, the 6.5 or 7 years since you wrote the piece you had us read in preparation for today, and how you would say political theologians are doing at decolonizing our minds and disengaging ourselves from Eurocentrism and the colonial syndrome.
Thank you, Richard. Since I wrote that piece, I have been thinking about how to develop that further. So in the last 3 years, I and other colleagues, both Asian Americans in the United States and Canada, as well as Asian colleagues, have been talking about political theology in the Asian Pacific. And next year, we are hoping to publish a book, if not next year or the year afterwards, because we saw that it is important to bring to the consciousness of the world of how political theology needs to be reconfigured in this part of the world. And so we have had these conversations focusing on several things. The number one is how to do political theology from a trans-Pacific perspective. That is not just basing our political analysis on one country alone, one nation, but trans-Pacific. And number two, when we talk about all the injustices and the traumas, how can we talk about reconciliation, peace, and the struggle for survival, for hope? So that is number two. Number three, we are going to talk about how LGBTQ issues intersect with political economy and is changing political dynamics in this particular region, especially in some areas in Asia. So I have begun to think more about what are the categories, what are the important concepts that needs to arise. Do we talk about sovereignty? Do we talk about governmentality? Those Western concepts, right, from Smith or Foucault? Or are there other concepts we need to be raising when we are dealing with a new configuration of societies with religious pluralism that is so important in the Asian context? Another thing I need to be thinking more, obviously, is what is going to happen to Sino-American competition. With President Donald Trump, we began the trade war with China. With President Biden, we began this Cold Tech war, technology, and then the limitation of sending those chips to China. And then are we going to have the financial war, or what kind of preparation we need to be thinking if we are going to have a military conflict. When I wrote that, that was very far-fetched. I'm talking about Taiwan. But given what Putin has done in Ukraine, many people in Asia have been thinking about the possibility of China taking back Taiwan militarily. I did not think about that as a possibility 6.5 years ago. But today, this is a really frightening issue.
Well, on that less than happy note, you underscore, Pui-lan, the urgency of this conversation. And I thank you very sincerely for leading us in this conversation. And I ask only one thing of you, and that is that you will come back and continue the conversation on another occasion. And I know that you will. I also want to mention that Kwok Pui-lan will be giving a presentation at the American Academy of Religion for those who will be there in Denver next week. And her presentation, if I'm not mistaken, is on Saturday at 12:30 p.m. So for those who want to look it up in the program book, and that will be on this very book, Post-Colonial Politics and Theology and Unraveling Empire for a Global World. I should be standing at the doorway, Pui-lan, hawking the book, but I won't. I won't embarrass you, but I am a great supporter and promoter and fan of your work, which I think is among the best, really the best work that's being done in feminist studies and religion. And I thank you for bringing it to water as you always do so generously. And I know I speak for all of us gathered here today in thanking you and wishing you well on this work as it continues. I had a sheet of 9 questions here to ask you, and I haven't been able to ask any of them. So I will simply save them for future conversation. With that, it is my responsibility to complete our contract, which says that we finish at 2 o'clock at the top of the hour. And we will continue in conversation for those who would like to stay on. And I see several people have raised their hands. Christie's is up, Anna's is up. We'll move right to your questions in a moment. But before we do so, let me make a couple of announcements, and then those who have to leave may do so gracefully. I know other people have just joined us, either not able to join us at the beginning of the hour or not realizing that the time had changed or whatever. But I know there are people who have joined us. I see Mark Primavesi from England, and hoping that he'll stay on and have conversation. But I want to simply thank Kwok Pui-lan again, let you know that the recording for this session, as well as the notes that we will offer, will be at www.waterwomensalliance.org. That's our website. And I want to mention 3 upcoming water programs. On next Monday, the 14th at 7:30 p.m., Pamela Miller, here present from Wesley Seminary, will be doing the meditation, Rest to Achieve Potential, entitled Rest to Achieve Potential. So we welcome Pamela for that next Monday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The very next night will be the water ritual at 7:30 with Diane New, a Thanksgiving theme, Grateful in Hard Times. A realistic view of Thanksgiving, I think. Grateful in Hard Times. That will be at 7:30 on Tuesday, November the 15th with Diane New. And then our next event will not be a water talk, but will be a water tea. That is a more informal conversation featuring our own Rosemary Ganley, who will be talking about the theme of responsible tourism, whether responsible tourism is possible, and if so, how, which I think is a very good way to close out the year in a practical and timely, theme. She has just come back from both the Galapagos and from Western Europe. And I mentioned at the top of the hour that the essay contest, the water essay contest, is named for Rosemary Ganley because of her marvelous way of looking at what we call feminists change the world in 650 words at a time. So we will be offering this contest, 650 words, $650 to the top 3 entries in our contest, with the hope and the promise that they will be published somewhere. This is not just for our judges to read, but in fact to be published somewhere, also to remunerate people who do this kind of work, to give them some support in that work, and hope you will share that news with your friends. We'll send it out with the announcements. So I close our session officially at the top of the hour, but I mentioned simply that our programs are free and open to everyone. Donations to water are needed and welcome. But our view is that if we socialize resources so that those who can donate do so, and those who are unable to donate are just as welcome and have no barriers to any participation, there's a way that we can have these programs without charge for anyone. We at Water believe that if we share, And the if is important. If we share together, there's enough. And I like to think that that's part of the move toward dismantling and unraveling empire. If we share together, there's enough. So thank you very much for your sharing of your time and your talent of being here. Thank you for being together, and enjoy the rest of your day. Feel free now to move right into conversation and chat as you wish.